You're watching Education for Health Professional Regulators of Ontario, colleges under the Regulated Health Professions Act. Richard Steinica is a senior partner of Steinica Mikura LeBlanc, and he practices exclusively in the area of professional regulation. Richard is a noted author of the Complete Guide to the Regulated Health Professions Act, which, because of its comprehensive nature, has been cited by courts and tribunals, even in cases dealing with non-health professions. Marshall Molesky is the past president of the Federation of Health Regulatory Colleges of Ontario, and he serves as Chief Executive Officer and Registrar of the Ontario College of Pharmacists. Join Marshall and Richard now as Marshall poses a number of important questions on behalf of those of us who want to know more about regulating healthcare practitioners in Ontario.
So Richard, see if I can get this phrase right. What does the phrase fiduciary duty mean?
Council and committee members have a duty of undivided loyalty, diligence to the college and the college's public interest mandate. So it's a little bit like being the trustee of someone's property. You have to respect the confidentiality of that person that you're acting for. You can't have any conflicts of interest, and you have to be diligent and respectful and ethical in the way that you handle it.
What is the content of the duty of confidentiality?
The concept of confidentiality under the RHPA is that all information is confidential unless an exception applies. That model is being looked at, and it's possible to be reversed, that certain things will be confidential and everything else is public, but right now the model is everything is confidential unless an exception applies. That includes not just information about individuals, but any information you obtain in the course of doing your duty for the college. And it's punishable. A breach of that duty is punishable by a fine, and it could also result in damages if you were to deliberately leak information.
Why does the RHPA so strongly emphasize the duty of confidentiality?
Well, there's three reasons why confidentiality is important. First of all, it protects individuals. Colleges are often dealing with unsubstantiated allegations, and they need to be sensitive in how that information is handled. It also encourages candid cooperation by members of the college or witnesses with the college if they know that the information will be kept confidential unless it's needed to protect the public. Secondly, keeping information confidential protects the tainting of the college process. So if a decision is to be made by a committee, it needs to be made by people who have an open mind with proper information, who have not been tainted by gossip. Thirdly, there is some value in allowing, at least in the early stages of discussing issues, putting everything on the table without worrying that someone will say, hey, they're talking about doing this radical thing, when in fact it's just putting all the options on the table.
You mentioned that confidential information can be disclosed if an exception in the RHPA applies. What are those exceptions?
Well, there's two main exceptions. One is if the information is already public under the RHPA. So for example, if something's been discussed at an open council meeting, subject to the principle of speaking one voice, that's publicly available. Secondly, if you are administering the legislation, you are allowed to share information to do that. So for example, during an investigation of a complaint, witnesses will have to be told that that investigation is occurring. There are other exceptions that are less common. For example, you can share information with another college. You can share information with police officers if there's concern about criminal behavior by a practitioner. If there's a concern about someone's safety, the disclosure could be made then. The college, if there's a prominent issue in the news, they could confirm that that issue is being investigated, and if there's written consent from everyone involved.
Most of what you discussed so far relates to disclosing college information to people outside the college. What about confidentiality within the college?
Within the college, there is confidentiality obligations as well, and it basically is need to know. You only have access to information if you need to know it to do your job. So for some committees, for example, the ICRC that investigates complaints, there's no need to tell other people for example, someone who might be undisciplined about the case because you might be tainting them. Similarly, though, the Quality Assurance Committee, they might need to know a lot of information about the past history of the practitioner in order to do their job, so the need to know could be very broad.
Richard, tell us about the additional duty of confidentiality in the quality assurance matters.
There's a special provision, in fact two of them, Section 83 and 83.1, that says that whatever information that is generated through the quality assurance process must stay there. We sometimes call it a black hole. They get all the information they want, but nothing comes out. This is to foster candid participation in what is really a no-fault, no-blame process, so that people feel comfortable in cooperating with the quality assurance process and don't feel that it is just a means to get information to go to complaints and discipline. There are a couple of exceptions. For example, if a practitioner is dishonest with the quality assurance program or not cooperating with the quality assurance program, that can be disclosed. And if there is significant concerns, the concern itself, not the evidence gathered, but the concern itself could be shared with the ICRC.
Richard, we often use the words privacy and confidentiality interchangeably. However, they're slightly different concepts, aren't they?
Very much so. Privacy is the concept that the information belongs to the individual. So a practitioner needs to only collect, use, and disclose information about a patient or a client for the benefit of the patient or client. Confidentiality, on the other hand, is sort of a legal duty not to disclose information. Colleges are more towards the confidentiality end of the spectrum than the privacy end of the spectrum because they have to collect, use, and disclose information that people don't want them to know about in order to protect the public. However, most colleges have a privacy code to try to respect privacy principles as much as possible within its regulatory mandate.
Earlier, you talked about the need for the college to be transparent. How do you reconcile this duty of confidentiality with the need for transparency?
It's an enormous balancing act, and definitely colleges do need to be transparent in order to retain public confidence. They have to be open in their process, and they have to ensure the public can scrutinize what they are doing to enhance the effectiveness of the college. However, given the current confidentiality provisions, the transparency and openness must be within the authorized areas that the RHPA permits. It must fall in with one of the exceptions. As we talked about earlier, though, some of those exceptions are quite broad, including making disclosure in order to administer the legislation appropriately.
Richard, realistically, very few councils or committee members would deliberately breach their duty of confidentiality. Probably the greater risk is for an inadvertent disclosure. How can this be prevented?
You're absolutely right. And if you are starting on as a new council member, a new committee member, a new staff member, you need to think through what are the ways in which I could, perhaps by reviewing something, taking something out of the college offices, reviewing something through a website, how could I be disclosing information that should be confidential by accident? So there's a series of measures in place that your college has. For example, there's physical measures. Even council members can't go beyond the front barrier that where the information is kept. They usually are kept to the parts of the college offices that are available for council and committee business. There are organizational measures such as the need to know policy we talked about earlier, and policies about what you do when you're transporting or transmitting information that you're using outside of the college offices. And then finally, there are technological measures such as passwords, encryption, virus programs, and firewalls that you need to be using to ensure the information is kept confidential.
Thank you.